السابقون الأولون من المهاجرين والأنصار والذين اتبعوهم بإحسان.
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. أما بعد. Today then, as you are aware, we're going to begin the new book, inshallah ta'ala, after having completed the previous one of the Sheikh Abdullāh Ad-Dhafīrī, hafidhahullah ta'ala, and that was the book Al-Rakā'iz Al-Ashara, Al-Tahsil Al-Ilmi. But now, the book after that is another one of the books of Sheikh Abdullāh ibn Salafī Ad-Dhafīrī, hafidhahullah ta'ala, the book Haqiqatul Manhaj Salafī, the reality of the Salafi Manhaj, the reality of the Salafi methodology. And this particular book, again, is reasonably short. It is not a big book, but within it there are many important points, many important principles that every Sunni, every Salafi needs to understand, needs to comprehend, and needs to implement and apply. And just like the other book, this particular book has introductions to it. It has been looked at by the senior scholars, by some of the major scholars, and they have approved this book. And you remember when we went through Al-Rakā'iz Al-Ashr that the Sheikh had mentioned whenever he writes a book, whenever he writes some treatise, that he presents it to the senior and major scholars for their approval, for their checking, for their input, for their guidance. And so that is what Sheikh Abdullāh Ad-Dhafīrī hafidhahullah ta'ala has done with this book too. He has presented it to some of the major scholars, and they have looked at it and approved it. So one of those introductions is from Sheikh Al-Fawzān hafidhahullah ta'ala. Sheikh Al-Fawzān hafidhahullah looked at this book and wrote an introduction to it. And so he said, and this is the Taqweem of Ma'āli Sheikh Ad-Doktor Salih ibn Fawzān Al-Fawzān. He says, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi wa ba'd. فقد اطلعت على رسالة بعنوان حقيقة المنهج السلفي للشيخ عبدالله ابن سلفي الظفيري وفقه الله، فوجدتها رسالة قيمة مفيدة مبنية على أدلة صحيحة من الكتاب والسنة وأقوال الأئمة. Sheikh Al-Fawzān hafidhahullah says that I looked at this treatise by the title of, which has the title, The Reality of the Salafi Methodology, written by Sheikh Abdullāh ibn Salafī al-Dhafīrī. May Allah give him success. and I found it to be a valuable treatise and a very beneficial treatise. A valuable and beneficial treatise that is based upon the evidences, the authentic evidences from the book and the sunnah and the statements of the great scholars of this ummah. وَالْحَاجَةُ مَاسَّةٌ إِلَى مِثْلِ هَذِهِ الرِّسَالَةِ. He says there is a great need for a book like this. There is a great need for a book, a treatise like this. في وقتنا الحاضر, in this time of ours, الذي خفي فيه منهج السلف على كثير من الناس. He said we have a great need for a book like this in our time, wherein the Salafi methodology is hidden and unknown to many people. Many people, they are unaware of the reality of the Salafi methodology, what it actually is, the methodology, the principles, what they actually are, as opposed to what people think they are, and as opposed to some who don't know what they are at all. بِسَبَبِ الْجَهْلِ. So one of the reasons for that, for the fact that the Salafi methodology is unknown to some, one of the reasons for that is ignorance, al-jahl. And the other reason for it, ظهور من ينتسبون إليه وهم لا يفهمونه أو يفهمونه ولا يتبعونه, is the appearance, the emergence of people who attribute themselves to the Salafi methodology, but they do not understand it. And even if they do understand it, they don't apply it. These are from the reasons why there is a weakness of understanding of the Salafi methodology amongst the people, or a lack of understanding of it, either because of ignorance outright, that they simply do not know, or because there are those who claim to be upon it and yet they do not understand it in reality. They think they are upon the Salafi methodology, but they do not understand in reality the affairs. And some may even be upon it and understand it, yet they fail to apply it properly. Even if they understand it, there may be some who fail to apply it properly for a variety of reasons that they may have. They do not implement the Salafi methodology in their lives, in their dealings, in their affairs, and as a consequence, the reality of it has become hidden from many people, and they do not know the reality of it, therefore. Then the Sheikh says, Sheikh al-Fawzan, حتى صار السلفي ممقوتا بسبب ذلك من غير فرق بين السلفي الحقيقي والسلفي المدعي. To the extent, because of those problems that we've mentioned, to the extent that the actual Salafi becomes despised or disliked amongst the people because they cannot differentiate between the actual Salafi, the one who is actually upon the methodology of the Salaf, compared to the one who is simply claiming it. claiming to be upon Salafiyya and yet they do not understand it, or claiming to be upon Salafiyya yet they do not implement and apply it. And the people cannot differentiate. They cannot differentiate between the reality of Salafiyya and the claimed Salafiyya of some. And as a consequence, they begin to dislike Salafiyya, the Salafis as a whole. وَقَدْ جَاءَتْ هَذِهِ الرِّسَالَةُ الْمُشَارُ إِلَيْهَا مُوَضِّحَةً لِمَنْهَجِ السَّلَفِ الْحَقِيقِي. And so this treatise, this book of Sheikh Abdullāh Ad-Dhafīrī, Hafidhahullah Ta'ala, the Sheikh says, the Sheikh al-Fawzan, it is here now, the Sheikh has written this, and it clarifies, makes clear what the actual Salafi methodology is, what the reality of the Salafi manhaj is. فَجَزَى اللَّهُ مُؤَلِّفَهَا خَيْرَ الْجَزَى وَنَفَعَ بِهَا. And so may Allah reward its author, and that is of course the Sheikh talking about Sheikh Abdullāh Ad-Dhafīrī, and may Allah make this a means of benefit for the people to understand and to recognize what Salafiyya really is. وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وآله وصحبه. كتبه صالح بن فوزان الفوزان. And that is the introduction written by Sheikh Salih al-Fawzan when this book was published, or at that time 11 years ago approximately. Then after that, and just to highlight also, Sheikh al-Fawzan looked over this particular book and wrote that introduction to it. Also, on top of that, Sheikh Rabi' bin Hadi al-Madkhali, Hafidhahullah Ta'ala, also looked over the book too. Both of them, Sheikh al-Fawzan and Sheikh Rabi', Hafidhahumullah, both of them looked over this book. Both of them checked it and gave their input to the Sheikh, etc. Both of them looked into it. Sheikh al-Fawzan wrote the introduction. Sheikh Rabi'a has not written an introduction, but he also checked over this particular book of Sheikh Abdullāh ibn Salfiq al-Dhafīrī, Hafidhahullah Ta'ala. So then we move in to the introduction. This introduction then will clarify and explain what this book is about, and how the book has been written and how it is organized. And that introduction now, this one now, it is written by the author himself, Sheikh Abdullāh Ad-Dhafīrī. So he says in the Muqaddimah, Alhamdulillahi al-Aziz al-Hakim al-Ra'uf al-Rahim الذي من رحمته الواسعة وحكمته البالغة أنه لم يترك عباده هملا بل أرسل إليهم رسلا مبشرين ومنذرين لئلا يكون للناس على الله حجة بعد الرسل وتكفل الله لمن اتبعهم بالهدى والنجاة والفلاح حيث قال عز وجل أفلم يهد لهم كم أهلكنا قبلهم من القرون يمشون في مساكنهم إن في ذلك لآيات لأولي النهى وقال من عمل صالحا من ذكر أو أنثى وهو مؤمن فلنحيينه حياة طيبة ولنجزينهم أجرهم بأحسن ما كانوا يعملون. That opening section is along the lines of what you would expect as a khutbatul haja, an opening section where the Sheikh praises Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala And he mentions that from the great mercy of Allah and His great wisdom, He did not leave His servants in this world without purpose. Rather, He sent to them the messengers as bringers of glad tidings and as warners, so that the people would not have any proof against Allah. That on Yawm al-Qiyamah they would not be able to say, we did not know. Allah sent the prophets and messengers, so indeed they know. And Allah has taken upon Himself that He will guide and give salvation and success to those who follow the prophets and messengers. And then he quotes some ayat from the Quran to support that. One of those is the ayah in An-Nahl, where it mentions that the one who does the righteous actions from the males or the females, and they are a believer, then we will give them a good life, and we will recompense them with the best of rewards for that which they used to do. And that is, of course, indicating following the guidance of the messengers. والصلاة والسلام على المبعوث رحمة للعالمين وبشيرا للمؤمنين ونذيرا للمعاندين أرسله الله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله ولو كره المشركون وتكفل الله بحفظ سبيله وبقائه واستمراره إلى قيام الساعة على يد طائفة اتخذت سبيل النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم نبراسا ومنهاجا. وذلك لما أخبر به النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم من حديث المغيرة بن شعبة رضي الله عنه، والذي رواه البخاري، حيث قال: لا تزال طائفة من أمتي ظاهرين حتى يأتيهم أمر الله وهم ظاهرون. صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه والتابعين لهم بإحسان، أعلام الهدى ومصابيح الدجى، الذين اختارهم الله لصحبة نبيه والجهاد في سبيله وحفظ ملته. أما بعد. So here again, continuing in that opening section, equivalent to the Khutbatul Haja, he mentions or he sends the prayers upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who came as a bringer of glad tidings to the believers and a warner for those who oppose. And he sent him with the guidance and the religion of truth to make that overwhelming over all other religions. And he mentions that another points in that opening khutbah. Then he says, فَكَمَا أَنَّ اللَّهَ تَعَالَى مِنْ تَمَامِ عَدْلِهِ وَحِكْمَتِهِ ورحمته أنه لم يترك عباده هملا، بل أرسل لهم الأنبياء والمرسلين فلا يخلو منهم زمن من الأزمان. And so, just as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from the perfection of His justice and wisdom and mercy, He did not leave His servants without purpose. Rather, He sent to them the prophets and the messengers. And so there is not a time throughout history except that the message was there, the prophets and messengers were sent. تحقيقا لوعده الصدق وقوله الحق. And all of that to actualize His statement, the promise that He made. من اهتدى فإنما يهتدي لنفسه ومن ضل فإنما يضل عليها ولا تزر وازرة وزر أخرى وما كنا معذبين حتى نبعث رَسُولًا. So he mentions here, quoting the ayah, that whomsoever is guided, then he guides upon himself, and whomsoever is misguided, then upon himself, and nobody will burden the wrong of someone else. Nobody will carry the burden of anyone else, and we will not punish a people until we have sent a messenger to them. And Allah didn't just punish the people in the stories and history gone by, but it was when they had a messenger sent to them and they rejected the messengers. And so then we see the stories of how Allah punished the people of the past. فَكَذَلِكَ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ عندما أراد كونا وشرعا أن يكون الإسلام هو خاتم الأديان ليبقى حجة على الخلق ورحمة للعباد، فإن الله تعالى تحقيقا لذلك قضى كونا وشرعا ببقاء طائفة تقوم بدين الله. And so when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed, in the creational sense and in the decree, Allah willed in both senses of that will that Islam would be the seal of all of the religions, and that Islam would remain as an evidence upon the creation and as a mercy for the servants. And so in actualizing that Islam will remain now as the final religion, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed that there would be a group from the people who remain to the hour upon that truth, and that is the narration we read earlier. لا تزال طائفة من أمتي ظاهرين حتى يأتيهم أمر الله وهم ظاهرون. That there will not cease to remain from my ummah a group who are upon that truth, and they will remain upon that until the command of Allah comes, and they are as such. وشاهدة عليهم يوم القيامة، نعم، وتكون حجة لله على الخلق شاهدة عليهم يوم القيامة وتعمل على حفظ دينه وتجاهد في سبيله حتى يأتي أمر الله وهم على ذلك. So that group of them, they will remain upon that truth, and they will be the evidence upon the people, and they will be witnesses upon them on the day of judgment, and they will work to preserve the religion of Allah, and they will strive and do jihad in the path of Allah up until the command of Allah comes at the end of time, and they are upon that way. And they are وَهُمْ أَهْلُ السُّنَّةِ وَالْجَمَاعَةِ أهل الحديث أصحاب المنهج السلفي. They are أهل السنة والجماعة أهل الحديث, the people, the ummah, the group who are upon that Salafi methodology in reality. وهذه الطائفة هي التي أخبر عنها الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم بقوله, and that group, they are the ones that the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم mentioned in his statement, لا تزال عصابة من أمتي يقاتلون على أمر الله قاهرين لعدوهم لا يضرهم من خالفهم حتى تأتيهم الساعة وهم على ذلك. رواه مسلم من حديث عبد الله بن عمرو بن العاص رضي الله تعالى عنه. That is the statement of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he said that there will not cease to remain a group from my ummah who fight upon the command of Allah, overwhelming their enemies, and those who oppose them will not harm them up until the hour comes and they are upon that way. And that is all in reference to Ahlus-Sunnah wal Jama'ah, those who are upon the Salafi methodology in reality. Then he says, ولأهمية هذا الموضوع في بيان وتجلية منهج هذه الطائفة المنهج السلفي، ولبيان الحاجة الماسة له في نجاة الأمة وتمكينها ودفع الشرور والفتن عنها، خاصة في هذه الأزمان التي تكالبت عليها الفتن من كل حدب وصوب. أحببت أن أكتب عن هذا المنهج الرباني مستعينا بالله عز وجل سائلا إياه الصواب والإخلاص في القول والعمل. So the Sheikh says, and due to the importance of this topic in clarifying and bringing out the reality of the methodology of this group of Ahlus-Sunnah and the reality of the Salafi methodology, to clarify and bring that out into the open, the importance of that, due to the importance of that, and due to wanting to clarify, and due to the great need there is in saving this ummah and bringing establishment for this ummah and removing the evils and trials and tribulations from it, especially in these times where the trials and tribulations, they come out, as they say, from every corner. Min kulli hadabin wa sawb. He says, I loved and I wanted to write this small book in clarifying this upright methodology. So he says, I sought aid with Allah, asking Him to enlighten me to write the truth and to give me sincerity in my statements and actions. And then he says, وَقَدْ جَاءَتْ هذه الرسالة على مقدمة وأربعة فصول وخاتمة. He says this particular book then, it has an introduction and then four chapters and then a conclusion. على النحو التالي, as follows. The introduction, بينت فيها أهمية هذا الموضوع وما تشمله الرسالة من فصول. He says in the introduction, I clarified the importance of this subject matter, the importance of the subject matter, and highlighted what this book will include. Then as we move through, the first chapter is going to be about Nash'atul Manhaj Salafi, how the Salafi methodology first developed in time from the Prophet ﷺ and the companions, and from those early days, how it progressed and built up from those early days directly from the Prophet ﷺ. وَبَيَانُ أَنَّهُ امْتِدَادٌ لِسَبِيلِ الْأَنْبِيَاءِ وَالْمُرْسَلِينَ. And in that first chapter he will clarify that the Salafi methodology is an extension of what the prophets and messengers came with. It is an extension from what they taught, the prophets and messengers. وَأَنَّهُ فِي حَقِيقَتِهِ هُوَ دِينُ الرَّسُولِ صلى الله عليه وسلم وَمَا كَانَ عَلَيْهِ الصَّحَابَةُ وَالتَّابِعُونَ وَاتْبَاعُهُمْ. And that in reality, in its reality, it is, meaning the Salafi methodology, it is the religion of the Messenger. When we talk about the Salafi methodology, it's not something strange or new that was made up and invented after the Messenger. The Salafi methodology, it is al-Islam. It is the exact religion as the Messenger taught us. It is the methodology from the Prophet ﷺ. So he says in the first chapter, I'm going to clarify that the Salafi methodology, its reality is that it's the religion of the Messenger ﷺ and what the companions were upon and the tabi'een and those who came after them. Then al-Fasl al-Thani, in the second chapter, Marahil al-Manhaj al-Salafi. The stages that this methodology went through. The stages of the Salafi methodology. وتكلمت في ذلك على مرحلتين تعد من أهم مراحل المنهج السلفي. And he says, I spoke in chapter 2, when we get to it, about two important stages of the Salafi methodology that are considered from the two of the most important stages of the Salafi methodology. And they are مرحلة تبيين وتوضيح وقواعد الدين وأساسياته ومرحلة تدوين المنهج السلفي. And that is the stage of clarification, a stage of clarification and clarification of the principles of the religion and the foundations of the religion, and how this methodology initially was recorded and written. Meaning the scholars of the early times, at the times of the Salaf, they have books in which they spoke about the Salafi methodology. They have books in which they wrote about and spoke about affairs revolving around the Salafi methodology. So he's going to talk about the earliest of those writings that are around and revolve around the Salafi methodology. Then the third chapter, استمداد المنهج السلفي ومصادر التلقي فيه وما أثمر ذلك في المتمسكين به من ثمار عظيمة ومن أهمها. The third chapter, when we get to it, it is going to be about, inshallah, the source of that Salafi methodology. Where is it sourced from? And what are the references that it is taken from? And the fruits that are seen by those who cling on to it, that they are indeed tremendous fruits. And then he breaks down some of the subcategories, but we'll get to all of those in the chapter. Al-Fasl al-Rabi', in the fourth chapter, he will speak about خصائص المنهج السلفي, some of the specifics of the Salafi methodology, some of the distinguishing matters, the specifics that you find from the Salafi methodology. And Al-Fasl al-Khamis, in the fifth chapter, it is going to be about براءة المنهج السلفي في بعض مدعيه وهم ليسوا منه. It's going to be clarifying the innocence of the Salafi methodology from some of those who claim it, but they are not upon it. They are not upon the Salafi methodology, yet they claim it. And so chapter 5, he is going to speak about that and declare the innocence of the Salafi methodology from certain groups or individuals who claim to be upon it and they are not upon it. والخاتمة, and in the conclusion, وأخيرا ختمت هذه الرسالة بخاتمة بينت فيها الحق الواجب تجاه هذا المنهج السلفي. In the conclusion, he says, I concluded this treatise, this small book, by clarifying the obligation upon us, the obligation that is upon us in regards to the Salafi methodology. The obligation in terms of the application and implementation of this Salafi methodology, what we need to be upon. It is never a case of just claiming something and yet opposing it in your speech and your actions. And how many people fall into that? Claiming to be upon Salafiyya, and yet their actions and speech are in contradiction to what Salafiyya teaches. And so in that fifth, or in that conclusion, he's going to clarify the obligation upon us in terms of the Salafi methodology. So then he says, فَأَسْأَلُ اللَّهَ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ أن ينصر دينه وسنة نبيه صلى الله عليه وسلم وأن يرزقنا العلم النافع والعمل الصالح وأن يثبتنا على سنة وما كان عليه سلف الأمة. So he says, I ask Allah the Mighty and Majestic to aid His religion and the Sunnah of His Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and to bless us with beneficial knowledge and righteous actions, and to make us firm upon the Sunnah and what the Salaf of the Ummah were upon. And then he says, in the end of his introduction, وَلَا يَسَعُنِي بَعْدَ شُكْرِ اللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ عَلَى إِحْسَانِهِ وَتَوْفِيقِهِ إِلَّا أَنْ أَتَقَدَّمَ بِالشُّكْرِ وَالْعِرْفَانِ لشيخي معالي الشيخ العلامة الدكتور صالح بن فوزان الفوزان والشيخ العلامة الدكتور ربيع بن هادي المدخلي على مراجعتهم هذه الرسالة وإبداء الملاحظات عليها، والتي استفدت منها كثيرا وأخذتها بعين الاعتبار ووضعتها في محلها، فجزاهم الله خيرا وبارك الله في حياتهم وجمعنا وإياهم في الفردوس الأعلى مع النبيين والصديقين وشهداء وصالحين وحسن أولئك رفيقا. He says, after thanking Allah, the Mighty and Majestic, there is nothing more I can do except that I need to present or put forth my gratitude and recognition to my two sheikhs. That I need to show my gratitude and thankfulness to my two sheikhs, the noble Sheikh, the eminence, Sheikh Salih ibn Fawzan al-Fawzan, and Sheikh al-Allama al-Dr. Rabi' ibn Hadi al-Madkhali, for their checking of this book. I need to thank them, and I wish to put forward my thanks to them for checking this book and for giving their observations to me, their input. Giving their input and their observations, which I greatly benefited from. And I took their observations and their input into consideration. I considered it very carefully, and I inserted it, their observations and points, in the relevant places in the book. So may Allah reward them and bless them in their lives, And may Allah gather us all in the Al-Firdaus Al-A'la, in the highest levels of paradise, with the prophets and the truthful and the martyrs and the righteous, and they are the best of company. So that is where he concludes his introduction, and that was written in approximately 12 years ago. This was approximately 12 years ago. So that is the introduction to this particular risala that we're going to be doing, inshallah ta'ala. It is, as you've seen there, going to clarify in detail, in a reasonable amount of detail, exactly what the Salafi methodology is. And that is now, you can see, that is now going to come to you from Sheikh Abdullāh Ad-Dhafīrī and Sheikh Al-Fawzan and Sheikh Rabi' in effect. They have checked this book, they have given their observations, and it's been published after all of that checking. So now we will learn, insha'Allah ta'ala, week by week, the reality of the Salafi methodology. What is Salafiyah in reality compared to what you may hear on the streets and what you may see on social media and what you may read here and there and from all types of sources. Then what better source than the ulama, than the scholars, Sheikh Abdullāh and Sheikh Al-Fawzan and Sheikh Rabi' to be learning the Salafi methodology from. So inshallah ta'ala, that is the introduction concluded. From next week we'll begin with the first chapter that will explain the source of this Salafi methodology and the development of it, how it first began, what it is, and that will of course be clear that it's the methodology of the prophets and messengers as well as the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.